So now we can finally install RetroPie onto the Raspberry Pi and start actually playing some games. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go to the RetroPie website. Just Google RetroPie and go to the first result. You end up here. Then you're going to want to go down to this drop box, go down to downloads, and download the Raspberry Pi SD card image for whatever Raspberry Pi you happen to have. I have a 2 Plus, I think, or something, but I know it's a 2, so I'm gonna get that one and get just the standard version and wait for this to download. Once it's finished downloading, you'll have this file ending in .image.gz, and then you're going to want to extract it. This may take a while, but just extract it to whatever you want. Once that is done, you should end up with this folder here with the RetroPie disk image in it. Next, you're going to want to open up Win32 Disk Imager. You can download this program for free from their website. And then you're going to want to select the disk image file that you had. And then select which drive you want. In this case, it's F for me. And then you're going to want to write it to the SD card. Just make sure you have the right device selected and you have the right image file selected, otherwise it could corrupt the disk. Once that is done, you can just take out the SD card from your computer and plug it into the Raspberry Pi. After plugging in the SD card for the first time, you're just going to want to apply power to the Raspberry Pi. This will boot it up for the first time. And the first time it boots, we're going to have to configure the controls. For this point, I recommend having a keyboard plugged in to use the controls until we get the actual arcade controls configured. After it boots for the first time, you'll see this screen. You're just going to want to hold down any button and it'll automatically detect you have a keyboard. Then you're just going to want to enter the controls you want to use to navigate the RetroPie operating system. And then you can just hold down a button if you want to skip something. Okay, now you just want to press OK and let it boot. Okay, now we're into the actual operating system itself. You can see a couple of the emulators that we have here. We have a few old PC games on here by default. The MAME emulator, if that's what you're using your arcade machine for, will show up once you actually put ROMs inside the folder. But for now, it only shows the emulators that have ROMs or files inside their folders. So now you're going to want to hook up your Raspberry Pi to the network so we can access it remotely and transfer files from our computer to the Raspberry Pi. For the controls, we are going to be emulating the button presses on the arcade machine into keyboard keys. And to do this, I'm going to use a program already designed by Adafruit. They have a tutorial here on creating arcade controls, but I'm just going to use the program that they provide. If you want more information on this stuff, you can check out their tutorial. It's linked in the description. And you can find out more details on it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is scroll down to here and download the retrogame program from GitHub. Just going to want to download the zip. So now you're just going to want to uncompress that file or extract it. Once it is extracted, you can just transfer the folder to there. We are going to want to open up a program called the WinSCP. This is also a free program that you can download. Once we open up the program, we're going to want to find the Raspberry Pi and connect to it. So first we're going to start a new session. Then we're going to want to select protocol SCP. The host name is the IP address of the Raspberry Pi. This should just be visible on the default terminal screen of the Raspberry Pi. If you just exit out of Emulation Station by pressing F4, it should just tell you right there. In my case, it is 192.168.0.104. The username will be Pi, and the password will be Raspberry. We can just save that if we want. Password didn't work quite right. Okay, there we go. Now we're in. So, we are going to want to transfer the file on our computer. We can just locate it by going to our desktop and then find the retrogame file. We're just going to want to transfer that over. At this point, you would also want to transfer any ROMs you had over to the RetroPie just by going to RetroPie, ROMs, and then finding the system you want to transfer the ROMs to. So now that's done, we can go over to the Raspberry Pi terminal and modify the program to match our joystick setup. Now we're at the Raspberry Pi terminal. We're going to want to navigate to where we put the folder. So to do this, type cd and then the folder you want to navigate to. Alright, once we've navigated to the folder we want, now we're going to want to type in nano space retrogame.c, and this will open up a editor so we can edit the file. So we're just going to want to scroll down quite a ways until we get to this section, which is the section for modifying the keys based on which pins you have the Raspberry Pi connected to. So you're going to want to modify the pin number that each switch is connected to and map it to a key on the keyboard. You can do this for as many controls you want. As long as there's a key on the keyboard open for it, you should be able to figure it out. I use this wiring diagram for my keys, so I will modify the file to match this diagram, and then we can install the program. Once you've done modifying the file, you're going to want to hit Control X to exit out of the text editor, and then we're going to want to type make space retrogame. And now to make it work with newer versions of RetroPie, we're going to want to type sudo nano /etc /udev /rules.d /10 dash retrogame dot rules. And once that is open, we are going to want to type in subsystem, all caps. I'll have all the code in the description down below. Equals equals, quotation mark, input, also, weird thing to note, on a Raspberry Pi, the at symbol is actually the quotation mark, so shift 2 is actually the quotation mark as opposed to shift apostrophe. Comma ATTRS, curly bracket, name equals equals, quotation mark, retro game, comma, space. I think there's actually supposed to be a space here too. ENV, curly bracket, ID underscore input underscore keyboard, close curly bracket, equal, quotation mark, 1. Okay. Once that is all typed in, just double check that's right. Alright, and once you made sure it's right, then you can press Control O to save the file. And just press enter. And then Control X to exit. Alright, so now to test it out, we're going to want to type sudo /retrogame, and it should launch the program. Now you're just going to want to press some of the arcade buttons that you have plugged into the pins that you have assigned keyboard keys to, and it should appear on the screen here. In this case, I'm using the joystick, and these little symbols here with the brackets and the letters, that corresponds to an arrow key on a normal keyboard. As you can see, if I press the keyboard over here, or if I move the joystick around. So now you know it's working. So just press Control C to get out of there. Now if that seems to work, we can then type in some stuff to make it start automatically once you boot the machine. So to do that, we're going to want to type sudo nano /etc/rc.local. Alright. Now, right before this last line, we're going to want to put in /home/pi and then whatever the folder that your program is called. And then type whatever the name of the program is. By default, it's retrogame, and then an and symbol right after that. Alright, now press Control O to save, then Control X to exit, and then we should be able to reboot again, and it should start up. Alright, now we can code in the controls that we map to our arcade controls into retrogame itself. So to do that, you're going to want to get to the menu, go down to configure input, and then just hold down any key. It'll automatically detect it's a keyboard, and now you're just going to want to press in the keys, use your arcade controls that you made, and set them to the corresponding controls. Once that is done, you now should be able to navigate the menus with the arcade controls. Now for the emulators, we're going to have to set up the controls for 2-player on an emulator by emulator basis. There's no way to do it just by default in the retro game settings. The controls you set up in the retro game settings should work for single player games, but they won't work for multiplayer. So in this case, I'm going to show you how to do it for the MAME emulator. So first, scroll over to the MAME emulator, and then click A to open it up, and then just select any random ROM you want. It doesn't really matter, and let boot into it. Alright, once you're inside, press Tab to open up this menu, and then you're going to want to scroll down and go to Input General. It's actually the first result. Hit Enter, and then you're going to, this is what you're going to want to modify. So you can set, starting here is basically where the important stuff starts. So you're going to want to set your settings that you programmed just by hitting Enter and pressing the key that you want, and should automatically do it. You can clear the result by pressing Enter and then the Escape key by default, and that will put in none. Otherwise you get multiple controls for the same key, like you can see here. So you can just scroll down that one, press Enter, and press Escape, and that will go none, and then you can program in what you actually want it to be. Alright, now that you've modified all your controls and set them to what you want, make sure to set all the controls. There are multiple players, there's up to 4 players, and there's a bunch of things. There's more, you can assign multiple controls to one thing. For example, if I scroll down here, these are all the player 2 controls. Player 3, you can see, player 4. You can set things like pedal to the A button, you can set things like dials to the joystick, whatever works, where you think will work. If it's like a steering wheel control, you can just set it to the default joystick. If it's like a throttle control, you can set it to the A button, or whatever you want. Once you're done, you press Escape, and then you can scroll down and press Return to Game. So that's it for programming in the controls. Now your arcade controller should work in the menu of RetroPie and in the MAME emulator. You can do the same process for any of the other emulators. It'll be slightly different, but the idea is the same. There's a bunch of other things you can modify too, to set it to how you would like UI settings, a whole bunch of stuff. There's themes you can get. Yeah, there's lots of customization in this operating system, and that's what makes it cool. You can really make it whatever you want it to be. Okay, now it's time for some finishing touches. The piece of molding I put on the front of the machine in the last episode didn't stay on very well because I wasn't able to cut a slot in the front because it would just cut the piece of wood in half. So I removed it, and instead I'm going to put a piece of angled aluminum on the front instead. This should protect the front edge from any wear and tear, any sort of bumps, and it'll also look nice. So the first thing to do is to set it on the front of the arcade machine and see how long it needs to be, and then cut it down to that length with a Dremel tool. I then sanded around the edges and the front of it just to clean it up with some fine grit sandpaper. And then I'm going to use some construction adhesive to glue it onto the front. I then just cleaned up the excess with some paper towel and let it dry. Alright, so that's it for this video. The arcade machine is finally done. Check out my next video where I'll be playing some games on it and showing off the final project, or check out my last two videos where I built the cabinet and installed the electronics.